First tonight to Sri Lanka, where the situation in the troubled country appears to be spiralling out of control. A nationwide state of emergency has been declared and a curfew imposed after the popular uprising that's gripped Sri Lanka engulfed the office of the Prime Minister as thousands of protesters laid siege to the building. They'd been angered by the news that the President had fled abroad, asking his ally, the Prime Minister, to stand in as interim President. The PM has now told troops to restore order. The country is bankrupt and Sri Lankans have struggled with months of food, fuel and power shortages. Arise correspondent John Todd has this report.
Protesters storm the Sri Lankan Prime Minister's office as the popular uprising over the country's devastating economic crisis continues. Security forces responded with tear gas, scattering crowds, but failing to quash their anger. A military helicopter circled overhead, but protesters were undeterred and finally surged into the compound. The demonstration came after it emerged that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa had fled the country.
We think that there's no need to him to resign or resign again because he has been kicked away now. Now the people's power, that is the most prominent thing, right? It has come to its peak. Now the politicians should realize the power of the people and they should listen to the people's commands.
Rajapaksa had called the Speaker of Parliament to say he would resign and that his ally, the Prime Minister, should be interim President, infuriating Sri Lankans struggling with months-long shortages of food, fuel and power. The President's flight brought to an end the rule of a powerful Rajapaksa clan that has dominated politics in the country for the last 2 decades. Protests against the economic crisis had simmered for months and came to a head last weekend when hundreds of thousands of people took over government buildings in Colombo, including the presidential palace. They blamed the Rajapaksas and their allies for runaway inflation, corruption and a severe lack of fuel and medicines. The President and his wife and 2 bodyguards left the main international airport aboard an Air Sri Lankan Air Force plane. It's understood they are now in the Maldives. Politicians have agreed to elect a new president next week, but are struggling to decide on the makeup of a new government to lift the country out of economic and political collapse. John Todd, Arise News.
Arise correspondent Laurie Laird joins me in the studio for more. Laurie, another dramatic day. We saw those pictures, angry protesters once again storming the offices of the Prime Minister, nationwide curfew. Bring us up to speed with the latest.
Well, I think I've been talking to contacts in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, and they are pleased that despite the degree of protest that we're seeing, not just in Colombo, but in the main cities all over Sri Lanka, that they're not seeing violence amongst the protesters, at least not yet. Now, one big concern is that the acting president, Wickremesinghe, has just said he wants the military to, in his words, restore order. Now that we know the military has a very strong allegiance to the Rajapaksas, the family that has left office, but they dominated government for so very, very long. The military still is quite connected to that family, and the fear is that being told to restore order may be something that is taken literally, and that we could very much see security forces on the street and things could turn a lot more violent.
And do we know, well, what do we know about the president's actual resignation? We know he's fled to the Maldives. He was supposed to submit this letter of resignation, but has he actually done that?
As far as we know, he has not. We're hearing from opposition politicians that he will be submitting this letter of resignation to the Speaker of the Parliament over the next couple of hours, but that is not coming from his camp. It's not coming from the acting president's camp, so it's not we're not able to really test the veracity of that claim, but it does seem a little suspicious that we have not seen this formal written resignation yet. As you say, the president or the former president, well, still the president, although he has put the ex-prime minister as acting president, using a part of the Constitution that allows an acting president to be named if the current president is out of the country. So he used that parliamentary or that constitutional clause. We know that he is in the Maldives. We don't quite know how much support he may have had to get there. But again, we don't know if he's resigning, when he's resigning. We've been waiting for this for 48 hours.
And why do you think the president chose to flee to the Maldives?
Well, it looked like he tried to get out. There are lots of reports, and nothing is entirely clear at the moment, but it looks like he and some of his family tried to get out yesterday, tried to get to somewhere in the Middle East. They were not successful in doing that, and it looks as though some of the border patrol in Sri Lanka refused to process their applications to leave the country. Now, Sri Lanka and the Maldives have always had a very, very close relationship. Sri Lanka helps to train the Maldives Navy, there are lots of security cooperation. We also know that the Rajapaksa family has a close relationship with the current Maldivian Speaker of the House and former president. Some reports that he was actually on the tarmac waiting to greet Gotabaya Rajapaksa and his wife and a couple of security forces. So the personal and political relationships have always been close. What we don't know is whether acting, former, it's difficult to know how to refer to Gotabaya Rajapaksa, but there's some reporting that he may be heading to yet a third country.
Right.
But again, all of this is really shrouded in secrecy.
And of course, while this political crisis continues and we don't have a sitting government in place, I suppose that reduces the chance of any sort of bailout from the IMF.
That's it. And the scenes that we are seeing, this video we are seeing, is so outrageous, so gripping in a certain way. We forget what an economic situation, economic pickle that Sri Lanka is in. Food and medicines getting increasingly difficult to get hold of. Absolutely no motoring fuel to come by at all. So people are feeling very poor. They can't get around. Food is becoming ever more scarce. Sri Lanka has asked the IMF for $3 billion in aid. The IMF is saying, there's no government here. We're afraid if we hand you money, it's just going to be looted. We can't do that yet.
All right, correspondent Laurie Laird, thank you.